What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayak Podcast. Apologies this week for coming to you a little bit late. I had some scheduling problems to make this episode work, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. I think you are going to enjoy listening to it. Just before we get started, as always, I just want to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by the lovely people who support me on Patreon. Patreon is a crowdfunding website which allows you to chip in a couple of bucks every month, get early access to this podcast, and generally help me keep it going. If you feel like you would love to help keep this podcast going, I would really appreciate you. Go check out patreon.com/Seth Ashworth, and you can leave a little bit there to help keep the lights on. Anyway, enough of that. Like I said, big shout out to those people on Patreon, and enjoy the podcast. Thanks a lot. Bye. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayaking Podcast. This week, I'm joined with recently crowned freestyle kayak world champion Dane Jackson, four-time freestyle men's kayak champion. Dane, how you doing? Thanks for joining us again.
I'm doing good, and that's 3, bud, but thank you anyways. Appreciate 4, but we'll work on that. No, I'm doing good, dude.
Just 3? I guess you're a junior in Plattling, eh?
Yeah.
So in this one, it would have been NOC, and it would have been Garb.
Yep.
Gotcha. All right. So
facts right.
At least I got my facts right out of the gate. So that's important. So 3-time freestyle kayak world champion, Dane Jackson. Dane, congratulations on your recent victory in Spain. It was a gripping battle between you and Kim Fontaine to see who was going to be the champion. I watched with bated breath through the live stream, which was great. And what I wanted to talk to you today was about the direction that ICF Freestyle is going. And for people who are not filled in, the ICF Freestyle Committee, like the people who organize that World Championship events and organize a number of other events, are really excited about trying to get freestyle kayaking into the Olympics. And as an Olympic sport, there's some good things and some bad things that go with that. And there's a lot of different arguments for the pros and cons. A lot of the pros arguments include increased visibility, more participation, more opportunities for funding streams, more opportunities for funding streams for like youth projects, and getting kind of more people generally involved in the sport and being more inclusive. And equally, there's a lot of aspects which are con arguments. Obviously, it makes it more kind of like narrow. It's kind of hard to watch. It's making the sport like a little bit like almost too niche and over technical, and kind of hard to understand like who's winning and why. And so I thought, who better to talk to this week and get their 2 cents on the topic than the current men's number 1, Dane Jackson. So I'm going to just put the question to you, Dane. Should freestyle kayaking go into the Olympics? Yes or no, and why?
The straight up answer is no. Freestyle kayaking is awesome. It's something I've been part of forever, and it is amazing. And to be able to represent your country in the Olympics is obviously a huge honor. And there's a lot of really cool things that come with it, like the idea of that you are on one of the biggest stages of sport. I do think that there is a right mentality behind it to have it in the Olympics, in the sense that you just simply get to represent your country in a grand scheme of sport. But in terms of actually, should freestyle be in the Olympics, and will it bring freestyle to a different spot and propel it? No, I think it will actually do the opposite. I think Olympics will actually hurt freestyle kayaking even more than sometimes a little bit of the larger organizations have actually already done to it, in the sense that right now, when you go to the World Championship, when we all go to the World Championship, occasionally there's people that take it just a little too seriously, and you actually just kind of want to be there for the fun of getting to compete with all your friends and stuff like that. But the cool thing about like even the World Championships, there are 5 men, 5 women from each country going to represent, and honestly, anyone from those countries can potentially win. There's always upset. There's always interesting results, all that. When it comes to the Olympics, people think that you get way more out of it, but honestly, there's only maybe one person that actually gets support from each country, and even then, it's not as much support as people think. Like people assume that you go in the Olympics, you make $1 million, and everything's awesome, but that's not how it works. All it is that it gives you the opportunity to run with it and potentially get funding from other sponsors. And when you say you're going to the Olympics, you're probably more likely to be able to get some sponsors that you might not have been able to get before. But in terms of freestyle going into the Olympics, and everything has changed and it's going to be huge and we're going to so much money in the sport, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, 100%. I've known enough slalom paddlers. I've been around the scene long enough that I know that all it comes down to is what you make of it. And all it really matters is that you need to be that number one spot, or there is very little support in any way, shape, or form. And all you can really hope is that you become that number one spot and maybe we'll get more support. But I honestly think that freestyle right now, it's too small of a sport to be able to take. Right now, you already kind of feel like if you don't feel like you're one of the top three, why spend $3,000, $4,000 to go compete when you know you might end up 10th or whatever, which is still awesome. But right now, it's still already kind of like a hard motivating factor. Like, I'm going to spend a lot of money and maybe not even make top 10. So you need to only go there just because you enjoy it. You get to hang out with friends and all that. Now it's stripped that by 9 people. Imagine that you already feel like you're not going to be the top one. You're not the top one out of the country. Only the top person out of the country can go to the Olympics. So if you're not that person, it's why motivate for it. Like, it's so hard to take that spot. Like it's just, it's not going to change everything. I think there's some great things about the Olympics, but I think kayaking too small. And I think kayaking does not have the right idea of what the Olympics is or what will happen if it did end up in it. And all the reasons that people want in the Olympics are completely the wrong reason. Mainly money, even though there isn't actually any money in the Olympics. So for me, that's the misconception people constantly have, is that they think you make it in the Olympics, you make a bunch of money, and then you keep going. It's like, no. Anyway, that's how I feel about it.
So Dane, before I answer here, excuse you. I'm gonna preface my answer by saying I agree with you. I don't think freestyle in the Olympics is the right move. But let me just take the counter position for a minute, just for the sake of this discussion and to keep things sporty. Do you think that if freestyle was an Olympic sport, there'd be more opportunities for greater exposure and more opportunities to fund like youth programs and inclusion programs and more like beginner programs, which could help grow our sport as a total and then have kind of more money in the total pie?
No, no, I don't think that's how it works. I think it's, if it was put under the right, if like people actually took the time to make it, that was the situation. Yeah, sure. It's all about what the other people do. It's about who pushes things in the right way. Anything is possible if the right people are doing the right thing. Um, sorry. Um, but when it comes to exposure and growing the sport, I don't think, like, what when you're trying to bring someone into kayaking right now, you hope that when they see it, they're like, I get to kayak with awesome people, I get to travel the world, I can go to these races if I want, I can go to this, I can maybe one day I'll make the freestyle team go to the world. There's 3 spots, 5 spots if I'm in the men's team, whatever, all that stuff. Right now it's kind of like you can kind of choose what you want to do, whereas if people that are only focused on the Olympics try running programs and they try to tell you that the only thing you should be focusing on the Olympics, all you're doing is funneling people into one line of sight to the point that that's all they focus on. And the thing is that not a lot of people can accomplish that. Seeing a slalom that people will dedicate years and still not end up where they want to be, and then they don't know what to do after because they've just spent their entire most 10 years only focusing on being serious and not actually getting to love the sport for what it is. And when I come with freestyle, I think right now it's at a point that I just feel like we can grow it in other aspects. But I think giving the future generation that one clear, you should go to the Olympics, and that's how people are pushing you, you're not going to get out of kayaking what you really could be getting. And therefore, I think it will kill a lot of motivation for the next realm of kayakers.
So let's cycle back a little bit there. Just pick apart that answer a bit. Um, slalom is like the great example that I was actually just about to come back to, and there's obviously tons of youth programs, especially like focused within slalom, and a lot of people get exposed to kayaking through slalom because of some of those like youth programs that have funding for like because of the Olympics basically. But I think it's really like what you're saying is kind of pretty on message in my opinion. I think you're right in that, like, if you start in a slalom program for a bit, your only goal is to like win that next race and move on to that next level until you eventually get to the Olympics. And I guess they have their World Cups and World Championships and stuff too. But I think if you spoke to most slalom paddlers, they would tell you that like the Olympics is the one they really want. And I think you're exactly right in like if you're not that one person, even if you're like near the top, but if you're not that one person, you don't get to go. And then what else do you do? Because all you've done is slalomed for your whole career. Like, do you think there's an avenue for those people to move out of slalom? Like, obviously, we do see some paddlers move out of slalom into like downriver and into motocross and extreme races and stuff. Like, is there a way that those people can get like unstuck?
I don't want to say it's stuck. I'm sure everyone that does slalom that does it because they love it. It's just a little bit of the. It's a little bit less of the I think the in between moments that they enjoy, like the becoming good kayakers. But I do think that like a lot of slalom kayakers they switch to creeking and do creek racing and stuff like that. But I do think that the youth programs are cool in the sense that you probably end up with some of the better coaching than if you were just to try to do some local classes. I think the programs are really good because you do end up with some of the best kayakers, but we have those in freestyle as well. We have the Keener program, we have the Kelly's program. Like there are opportunities with that with whitewater, but I think the focus of it is to have fun and pursue the sport if you want. And if you want to pursue the sport, there's options for you. Whereas I think the hands-on, like aggressive, like be serious. This is where it begins. And the end result is only Olympic gold. Like that, like it's you start and then there's Olympic gold. It doesn't really seem like people really put a emphasis on the journey in between, the kayaking in between, the fun with friends. Like I haven't spent enough time slalom. I know that a lot of slalom paddlers are awesome. They're all awesome people. It's just when you only have one goal in mind and it is a pretty full-on goal, a lot of times it can be a little tricky to keep motivating the kayak. Whereas I feel like kayaking right now only has the like, yeah, sure, if you want to win the world, great, do some freestyle. Sure, if you want to go win the North Fork, go do some racing. Like, but there's still a lot of in between kayaking that's a lot of fun. So I think it's the Olympic kind of eliminates that in between joy of I'm just gonna go kayaking and hang out with my friends. Whereas like I can't go hang out. Olympics is in 3 years. I have to go train.
Yeah, I think that's pretty. For me, that resonates pretty true, and I think it hits the nail on the head. I'd be interested to talk in a future podcast to someone in the like slalom Olympics world, to see if what we're talking about here resonates kind of true. And I think this is super interesting. We're kind of talking like future right now. Let's talk about how this like future goal is shaping freestyle kayaking right now. So that like this discipline of like ICF freestyle kayaking is because they want to get to this goal has kind of taken a pretty narrow pathway, and it's kind of almost like squeezing a bit tighter into this one like we want to get to the Olympics goal. And I think that's starting to have quite a negative impact on the discipline, on that like competitive freestyle kayak discipline. Is that your car?
Yeah, no, that's my car alarm going off nearby.
Nice.
Anyways.
Sorry. I think because the freestyle committee is trying to get to this goal of like getting freestyle in the Olympics, I think it's started to get to a point where it's really, really starting to hurt the sport now. And some examples I want to talk about with that were things like event location, like the variety of waves and holes has kind of gone away, and we're now only really seeing those ICF competitions be like holes and not even always like the most exciting holes to watch. Like
Yeah.
especially like if you take that Argentina hole, it was just like slow and You could do a lot of tricks there, which is cool, but it's kind of like pushing away from that like 2015 wave boating or like the 2007 like Bus Eater Worlds. Like we're just getting into this like small, tiny like NOC whole thing. Like it was, it's kind of like starting to affect feature selection. And another thing I've noticed from the spectator's point of view, I think it's really started to cut down on athletes doing certain tricks because it's so. You find what you're looking for there, bud?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get the other.
I
Keep going.
think like it's so like because they're trying to get to this goal, like everything is like getting pushed into being more precise and a lot less free. Like there's a lot less free in freestyle now than there was like 5 years ago. And if you look at a trick like Phonics Monkey, which for people who are listening who don't know what that is, that's like a trick where you start in a front surf, you do a pirouette on your bow, and then finish in a front flip. And in like 2011, we used to see these like all the time. Like a lot of people were doing them. It's a really fun trick to see. It's like really impressive. And as freestyle is getting more pushed into this, like we want to go to the Olympics, it's kind of like killing off some of their like variety and style. So if you're not doing it exactly in the ICF style, then you don't score and you get a zero. And I was really disappointed to see a few rides score a lot lower than I was expecting because they had phonics monkeys in them, and evidently they weren't getting scored by all the judges. What do you think about that?
I do agree that, well, really what all it comes down to is because, I mean, like no one ever does it with malicious intent. Nothing's ever done with the intention of being negative. But I would say that what it's come down to is that this goal to be in the Olympics had become such a narrow focus of the people in charge that the athlete experience, they've sacrificed as much as they could within the athlete experience just to make sure that they're in the lines of what the organizations want to see. Um, like they'll spend thousands of dollars on things that maybe one or two people are happy about, or maybe a few spectators are happy about, but then the athletes are left having to spend like 300 euros just to get a shuttle from the airport. So, and then left to fend for themselves when it comes to camping, lodging, all that. So it's definitely really what it comes down to, and what's hurting is that there's there's no focus on whether or not the athletes are happy. It's simply whether or not the people above, the people organizing, are happy. They're like, oh, you have a live stream. That's great. That looks great. Oh, you have a VIP booth. Oh, you have this or that. So that's all it really comes down to. That this focus of getting the Olympics has made it to where they're not focused on making sure the athletes are happy. And what that has also been an issue with is the judging, in the sense that in the past it's always like there's always been issues with the judging because they just hire the same people, and we can complain about them as much as we want, but they constantly bring back the same people, and they wonder why people don't want to compete under the judges that never score anything or are more strict than they need to be. But I will say, um, whatever this world was the first time in probably 10 years that I've been like, you know what, that judging made sense, except for the wave world because that's obvious judging. But in terms of whole judging, I would say this is one of the best worlds that I've been a part of. It's probably the first time I have not had any complaints in a very long time, which was sweet because going into it, we like after a few rounds, we were like, you know what, I feel good. I'm just going to compete. No complaints about the judging. This is great. But then when it comes to the rest of the organizations, they still don't really focus on the athletes. They only focus on what looks good to the people that are wondering whether or not they should be in the Olympics. And therefore, it was just a stressful week of just people screaming at you and you're never doing anything right, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, it was kind of chaos. But judging was great. Off water, the organization, the way they make it for the athletes, not so much. But it's no
All
bad
right, Dane,
intentions, but that's just
I'm
how it
just
is.
gonna meander you back on topic for a second. What do you think about venue selection and how it's becoming less varied?
But, oh, the selection, like less, like you're seeing the same names, you mean?
No, I mean like the event locations are
Oh,
getting more
event
of like the same.
location.
They're
Sorry.
like the features. They're almost just trying to make the same feature in a different spot.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Sorry. Well, sorry. That's what I was trying to tell you, that like they focus more on the spectators more than the kayakers. So they don't care if the kayakers ended up in a little feature Um, if as long as that feature can be somewhere that can bring a bunch of spectators and live stream and all that. So the focus is not in the kayakers and the feature. And so I agree that event selection where it is, it's getting a lot smaller because they're focusing so much on the spectators, live stream, all this other stuff that they don't even focus on the kayakers anymore.
What do you think about this Spain feature? For people who don't follow you on Instagram, and I imagine there's no one who listens to this podcast that doesn't follow you on Instagram, but like a week before the competition, you posted this massive hole in the stern of your C1, and it was like, I don't know, I bet I could have put my like biggest finger in this hole. It was huge. What was that all about? Tell people about that.
So basically, this feature was designed, and it was basically a giant ramp that goes into deep water, which does not form a good feature. Anyone that knows will tell you. But they basically they salvaged. Well, the first thing they did was try to make the hole deeper because you couldn't even do a cartwheel because it was so shallow. And so what they did is they removed one of the because basically this whole park was just cement square blocks everywhere. And like occasionally real rocks, but the hole itself, the bottom, they had these steel plates that they had over the rocks for forming the feature, and they thought to make it shallower, they would remove one of the plate, so that way, or sorry, to make it deeper, they would remove one of the plates, and maybe the hole would be deep enough. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. They had to end up, they actually had to back up the river. They actually had to back up the river to move the hole up to even get it remotely deep, and luckily it ended up that it was just barely deep enough to do the tricks, and even though you're still hitting on almost every trick. But the funny thing is that after they removed that piece of metal, they still left the pieces of rebar that were holding in the metal. So there were like 3 pieces of rebar in the hole, but there was one you could actually hit with your boat, which was like the middle right of the feature. And basically, if you tried plugging it just a little bit too far upstream, you actually ended up hitting this metal. And I think about at least 4 or 5 boats that I'm aware of hit it and put giant holes in it. Because if you were to like, especially in C1, when we tried to back loop, we're way upstream, and we would just hit the metal, put giant holes in it. So yeah, at least 3 or 4 boats that I know of did it, and then there were a few more that hit it for sure. But a couple of us put massive holes in our boat. We had to actually weld them.
Yeah, it looked just unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. All right, let's put a little pin in there and just shift topics again. We're talking about the audience experience, right, and the people watching and the live stream and stuff. And one of the things I've always said about why it doesn't make sense to go to the Olympics is because if the argument I always make to people is if my grandparents in England turned on the Olympics and freestyle kayaking was on, they would have no clear idea who was winning. Like it's almost become like too over technical. The score sheet is like almost too difficult to understand, and it's difficult to tell, like, unless you know you're like in the know in the top, like, say 10 men or top 10 women. It's difficult to see like a really clear winner sometimes,
Yeah,
especially in the earlier rounds.
yeah, no, definitely. No, I've always been aware that freestyle kayaking is it's hard to follow, and it's definitely it's a battle for sure. But when it comes to the Olympics itself, I mean, it's like you got to remember that we're just one piece of a giant puzzle. It's not like when freestyle makes it in, people are going to stop watching the diving or the swimming, and they're going to start watching freestyle. It's like, no, we're just, all it means is that we get a couple medals for the people that want to get those medals, and organizations are going to give them out. Doesn't mean that there's going to be 100 million more people watching us. All it matters is that all we're getting is a few Olympic medals. Whereas, like, do you know how many sports there are that we probably don't even realize that are in the Olympics? Like, people see the 5 big sports that they follow anyways, like swimming, snowboarding, whatever it is. You see that, but then you forget that there are like thousands of other athletes, hundreds of other athletes competing and getting medals that you probably didn't even know were in the Olympics. Whether it's like the skiing class, shooting a gun, bow and arrow, all that. Like, I know it's there, but I don't think it was that.
Biathlon, I think that is, dude.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
Thanks for the heads up. Um,
Canada, bro.
well, exactly. But yeah, yeah, you've earned your Canadian citizenship. But that's the thing, is that like people forget that we're just a little piece of a giant puzzle, and that just because we're there doesn't mean that people are gonna. It's like walking around a festival. You're not gonna see everything, and yeah, the people that are gonna see it, they're probably just there because they already care about it. Therefore, I don't think you're going to gain a ton of new audience. I just think it's going to be a similar situation, except we're just potentially a few more, little bit more opportunities for exposure because you can put the word Olympics behind you. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything just grows exponentially just because you're there. If anything, we're just there.
I hear you, bro. I think we're on the same page, since the start of this discussion, really. And this whole discussion has felt a little bit doom and gloom. What do you think the ICF can do to fix the situation and to make kind of freestyle kayaking go forwards in a more, in our opinion, more positive direction? What do you think?
I think that the ICF has never had bad intentions with whatever they do. I just think that with their power, their funding, and what the opportunities that they could create, and simply trying to create athlete experience, make it to where it's actually enjoyable for the athlete, and then the spectators can follow. And you can still make it great for the spectators, but right now it's like the priority is anything but the kayakers. Like the kayakers are going to show up anyways. We're going to get our winners anyways, so we might as well make it epic for the spectators. So I think the ICF is in a really good position to make some of the best events if they just would take the power and funding and everything they have to make an event that's incredible for the athletes, whether it's the lodging, the everything sorted out, the best featured, maybe some prize money, who knows, whatever it is. I think that they're in a great position to make some of the best events if they would just focus on the athletes a little more than the non-athletes. Because as long as there's athletes and you have a competition, spectators will come. So you might as well focus on keeping the athletes happy because they're the ones that are showing up, spending the money, and they're that want to make the event the best possible.
Dane, I couldn't agree with you more. I think it all starts with your foundation, and your foundation is those people who you're there to watch, not the people who are there watching.
Yeah.
I think that's a really strong message. I hope that this gets into the ears of someone in the know there in the power circle. I doubt it will, but I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. Maybe it will just float over there, and that would be interesting. Um, Thank you so much for taking the time. Do you have anything else you want to add on there? Where can people follow you if they don't already?
If you enjoyed this message, follow me at Dane Jackson Kayak. If you hated this message, follow Seth Ashworth.
Right on, Dane. Thanks for taking the time. I appreciate you, buddy. This has been Questions You Never Thought to Ask, the Whitewater Kayak Podcast. I will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Peace. One last thing, guys, if I could trouble you to go ahead and leave a review, leave a rating for this podcast, it would really help me out a lot, help it grow, help more people hear it. I appreciate you guys. Be honest, say whatever you think, leave however many stars you think it is. I won't be offended if it's 1 or if it's 5. Obviously 5 encouraged. And I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Peace.